Hello, friends, and welcome to the 7th episode of a special weekly witness series introducing Texas Impact's legislative priorities for the next biennium. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and this week we continue our series with a discussion about abortion access and reproductive rights and what Texans of faith can do. During this series, we'll welcome a faith leader to help introduce a section of the legislative priorities and have a conversation about why it's an important priority to the faith community. Then we'll be joined by a member of the Texas Impact team to help us prepare for the policy conversations we'll need to have leading up to the upcoming election season and legislative session. Here with us for the conversation is Rabbi Mara Nathan, Senior Rabbi at Temple Beth-El in San Antonio, and Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead. This episode is part of a 10-part series on Texas Impact's legislative priorities, and you can find the complete set at texasimpact.org. We hope you'll share both the priorities and this series with your congregation and groups. And if you need a refresher on where they come from, the first 2 episodes in the series feature board members and staff talking about just that. And y'all, I probably don't need to remind listeners of this program that election season is now upon us. Early voting is underway, and Texans of faith are voting and encouraging their congregation to participate in this election. Make sure that you're doing your part. Texas Impact's here to support your work, so check out the Texas Impact Election Center on our website. This series is focused on the issues Texans of faith care about, but what happens with those issues will be decided at the ballot box. So make your voice heard and do your part to make sure your community and network is represented. So with that, here we go. Our conversation with Rabbi Mara Nathan. Joining us for today's conversation is Rabbi Mara Nathan, Senior Rabbi at Temple Beth-El in San Antonio. Rabbi Nathan, thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Glad to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We're longtime fans here at Texas Impact and glad to have you on the program.
Thank you.
We are in the midst of this series where we're laying out Texas Impact's legislative priorities. And some of the issues that we're talking about, healthcare, et cetera, have been on our agenda or our list of priorities since we were founded almost 50 years ago. And the maternal health part of this priority has been addressed by our membership in the past, but abortion and access to reproductive rights is new for us organizationally. So I wonder if you can start the conversation today by just talking theologically about why you and others, specifically in the Jewish community, see this as an issue Texans of faith should prioritize.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I do think that maternal health and also abortion and access to reproductive rights are very strongly interrelated. And I think part of the challenge for all of us is that we see the impact across economic lines, class lines, and also racial lines. So when we think about our responsibility to the greater community, not just our own little insular communities, it becomes really clear that these issues are really one and the same. I do want to acknowledge, of course, that this is such a polarizing issue for people,
right?
And maybe not your audience particularly, but it's important to remember that as passionately as we feel about this, there are people who maybe feel just as passionately and have a completely opposite opinion about these various issues. And I also want to be clear that not all Jewish people and not the entire Jewish community feels like abortion is a right that all women should have. But I do really feel like there's a lot of theological grounding for this idea and these rights in general. So I think there's 2 different ways to think about reproductive rights from a Jewish perspective. The first one is when a person is actually considered a person, which really differs in Jewish tradition than it does maybe even in mainstream Christian tradition. And then the other is, what rights does a woman have to make choices about her own body? And I think you can see strong Jewish arguments for a pro-choice argument on both of these ideas, but I'm happy to take just a moment to play those out for you.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear it.
Great. So first I want to say that Judaism is very clear that life begins after birth. We see this like even in very traditional Jewish circles, if God forbid a child is born as a stillbirth, there are not full funeral rites or rituals for a child like that, which I think in many of our more modern worlds, we would really want to honor the life of that child, even if they were not a viable person once they came out of the womb. So, and we also see in medieval commentaries that an unborn child is considered to be part of the woman's body. There are texts that say the child is like fluid, or that the fetus is as if it's part of the thigh of the mother. And clearly these are not medically true statements, but
Right.
back then that was what they understood. But it helps us understand that going all the way back, when we think about an unborn fetus inside of a woman, that Jewish tradition sees that as something that is part of her body as a whole. Okay.
Right.
And then there's the part about a woman's worth as a person and also her autonomy. And if we go back to some of our most revered and famous Jewish scholars, they felt that a woman's life should be prioritized above or before that of her unborn child, especially in moments when her pregnancy was causing her physical harm. And there's also many writings about an unwanted pregnancy being one that causes a woman emotional or psychological distress, and that those would also be reasons to warrant the termination of a pregnancy. So I think from a traditional standpoint and also a more modern one, there is a strong claim to be made that Judaism as a whole prioritizes the physical and emotional health over that of the life of an unborn fetus.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful in laying that out. And one of the things that has been kind of at the forefront of my mind as we've been having these conversations over the last few months is that for many, this is also a religious freedom issue, right? And so can you talk some about why that would be the case for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is an issue that goes beyond even women's health and their reproductive health and autonomy. There obviously are faiths and denominations that are violently opposed and reject abortion as an option for people who are pregnant. And I think if a woman who is part of that particular faith community was faced with such a decision, she would most likely be strongly opposed to choosing abortion as an option.
Right.
But if our country is one that protects religious freedom, then we have to give each community the opportunity to make their own decisions about these kinds of things. And I shouldn't be held to the religious doctrines of another faith. And I think the really dangerous part for us to think about is when those religious doctrines get written into law, because they are religious doctrines. That means that the people who are in power get to determine what the rest of us are allowed to do, whether or not we have those same religious beliefs that they do.
Right. So speaking of those with different religious doctrines, on some of these issues, especially abortion, reproductive health, I would add LGBT issues to that as well. I feel like it's especially important that people of faith speak to these issues when they have a dissenting view from what might seem to be the mainstream. And so does that sound right to you? And is there a particular importance for people of faith who support abortion access to speak up from a faith perspective?
Absolutely. I think when the religious right, so to speak, claims that they are right and that they are speaking for anybody who is a person of faith, then not only is that dangerous, but they're taking away our own voices. And, Reform Jews are not the only progressive religious people in the country or even in the world. And there are a lot of us who feel that our faith would have us support a woman to make very difficult choices for themselves, that we prioritize the sanctity of their life as the number one priority. And also, though, acknowledge that wanting or choosing to have an abortion is not a thing that anyone should take lightly. I certainly don't advocate abortion as a means of birth control, but there are
Right.
so many instances where not the physical reality or the emotional, psychological reality of someone's life necessitates that they be given the opportunity to make a choice that works for them and their family. And giving people the space to make those choices within their own cultural traditions and their own faith traditions is really important. And to me, it speaks of that bigger issue that you were mentioning about freedom of religion and and independence, and that each human being should have their own autonomy to make those decisions for themselves.
Right. So what do you hope folks will do, right? Like we're having this conversation about the importance of speaking up. We have election season coming up. We have the Texas legislature coming. Congress is meeting all the time. What do you hope listeners, Texans of faith, people of good conscience would do on this issue?
Well, first, I think it's really important to do your research to understand what the record is of each individual candidate, particularly on the issues that are meaningful to you. To just listen to what people say on the campaign trail, to just hear people say, well, that person is reasonable, right? Well, who's to determine what is reasonable? So it really is upon us as citizens to understand what people's voting records are and what it is they actually do and stand for. Because when we elect people who say one thing and do another, then we know that we've been lied to, first of all, perhaps, or maybe we haven't, but we haven't taken the action that we need to protect our own voice and our own vote. And certainly for all the people who are able to bear children, we need to make sure that we protect our own bodies and our own control over our own bodies. I think that to govern isn't about deciding what other people should believe. And it's not about putting forth a social agenda. It's about making sure that every single citizen has a good life, a safe life, has the freedom to live their life in a way that is true to them. And we're in very dangerous ground when we allow our government to make cultural decisions for us that are a reflection of their own culture, as opposed to a reflection of somebody else's culture and someone else's beliefs and faith in general.
Right. I feel like we've mentioned it a couple times, or at least a sentiment a couple of times during this conversation, but this is a hard time right now. And I know, especially hearing from the women in my life, including, my daughter, like this is not a fun time when we hear the political discourse. That said, as a faith leader, I think it's always important that we keep hope in front of us. And so I've been asking faith leaders during these series of conversations, where you find hope in these challenging times.
I definitely find hope in the sisterhood, the women and the men who are allies as well, who are angry about the status quo and are speaking up and standing up and trying to elect people who they feel are going to be more a reflection of their own beliefs. I look around in my own community, in my own congressional district, both local, statewide and national. And there's some real scrabbling out there to try to get the right people in place. And it's a lot of work. And the people who are speaking up for the things that are important for me don't necessarily have the money, right? They don't necessarily have the connections that would make them a shoo-in. But I think when we look at the electorate of our state as a whole, especially in the cities, we understand that we're a much more moderate, progressive state than we look like on paper. I'm from New York originally, and I definitely have my family and friends who are like, how could you even live in Texas? Like, that place is crazy, right? And I'm like, but if we're not here to stand up and speak out and try to protect the people who don't have the wherewithal or the voice to do it, then who's going to do it?
Right.
I was like, I have plenty of friends and plenty of connections to elected officials who feel just the way that I do, and I need to support them. We have to support each other. So, that does give me hope. And also that we're raising young women who are so socially aware. who don't take things for granted and maybe the way that women in the last 20 or 30 years or so kind of have taken things for granted because the generations before who did all the hard work made it that they just assumed they would always have the right to choose an abortion if they were in, the unfortunate situation to need to do that. They assumed that gay people would continue to have rights. They would assume they would continue to have access to contraception, right? And these are things that even in the last 10 years, we just would never have imagined were really going to be under attack to the extent that they might be in danger. And now I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks, oh my, like we need to stand up and speak out loudly about these issues and make sure that they don't get turned when we're not paying attention.
Yeah, I share that hope too. We Texas Impact just finished a tour around the state, a Faith and Democracy series where we had faith leaders and advocates talking about how people could engage. And I mean, the people who came out were younger than we've had in the past and were definitely a lot more skewed in the female direction. And the issues they cared about and the passion they brought was incredible and exciting. And I do think we have a hope-filled future. And so I am hope-filled because you are here with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time. Any shameless plugs you'd like to leave with us or closing thoughts today?
Just get out to vote. Vote early. Don't vote often. That would be a bad thing. But make sure that you get to the polls. Make sure you bring people to the polls. It really is true, especially in the statewide elections, that every vote counts. And it's not good enough to believe in the right thing, which is to say that everyone is entitled to their own beliefs and to live their life in a way that's authentic to them. But they shouldn't be able to decide what I believe or how I get to live my life. So you got to get out there. You got to stand online, go early. That's the way to go. And make sure you cast your vote for the people that stand for the things you believe in. And we can keep hoping, but not just sit and be passively hopeful, but work hard to try to change the future.
Absolutely. Vote and bring 5 friends with you.
At least.
At least. Rabbi
But everyone
Nathan,
should wear a seatbelt. Everyone should wear a seatbelt in their car.
Yes, please do that. There's your public safety announcement for the day.
Exactly.
Rabbi Nathan, really appreciate the time. Really appreciate the work you're doing every day on behalf of a better Texas. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This week's episode was brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas.
Joining us for today's response is Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead. Hello, B.
Hey, Scott.
It's good to see you.
It is
How are you feeling?
good to see you, too. I'm feeling good.
Excellent. Well, we just had a chance to listen to the conversation with Rabbi Nathan, and I wonder if there's anything that especially stood out to you in that conversation.
Yeah, I was fascinated. I mean, she's so articulate and well-studied and all of the things that we expect from a rabbi. I'm never tired of hearing her interpretations. The thing that she really did for me was to systematize what we know anecdotally is the Jewish community's strong support for women's right to choose. But she, took it all the way back to medieval commentary, which I thought was great. And one of the things she did by doing that, it was helpful to hear that systematic articulation of the Jewish community's position and teachings. But also, it's a good reminder to all of us that our traditions are traditions, right? That when we are articulating the faith community's position on an issue as Texas Impact, we're not saying a few people or one charismatic person or, a small group of people in one community or something like that. What we're saying is over a long period of time, she was talking about centuries of the interpretation and reinterpretation and iterative intergenerational learning that goes into the development and maintenance of religious traditions, that's really important. And it's not at all apart from our own secular constitutional democratic tradition, which also has developed iteratively and over time, over generations of conversations between people who agree and disagree with each other. And I think if we could really hold those two ideas together and say, our country is built for iterative community discussions. It's not built for one person or one group of people exerting their will unilaterally over and against everybody else. We'd be in a way better place going into the next legislative session.
And you've talked on this podcast over the course of the last few weeks about this being a new issue, abortion access and reproductive health being a new issue for Texas Impact and our members. I wonder if when we have conversations with our legislators, you think it's important for us to talk about some of those religious freedom aspects on this issue.
Oh, absolutely, I do. I think not to, not answer your question because I'm not done talking about my thing, but I will. I want to tie those two things together and say, yes, it's absolutely important to talk about religious freedom, and what Rabbi Nathan did such a really helpful job doing was to put those two ideas together and say, our religious traditions have developed with particularity over a period of time, and each of them is just as valuable as every other one. And so religious freedom is about all of us being able to practice the religion with the doctrines and the liturgies and the observations that we believe and is our thing, and that it's not American. It is un-American to try to write into the law a preference, implicit or explicit, for one set of doctrines and practices and liturgies over another or over everybody else.
Yeah, and I think I would argue, and I think I've heard Josh argue, that that's why we need to come at this from as people of faith, because I think Josh's argument would be that there are a small or minority group of Texans who are making an argument that you should bend to our religious doctrine or our religious traditions. It's a religious issue. And I think our folks would say, hey, we're religious people too, and we have a different angle on this, right?
That's exactly right. And I think there are two heresies, if you would, that happen. One of them is the heresy of this religion is better than everybody else, and the other heresy is this religion is invalid compared to anybody else. And those two heresies present themselves in legislation as this is the way we're going to do it. Why? Because my faith tells me, and I'm the one who's in charge. The other is we're not going to let you do your thing. Why? Because your religion isn't the one that's in charge. And I think it's important to keep both of those ideas in tension. Rabbi Nathan said a really important thing. She said, it is dangerous to allow elected officials to make cultural decisions for all of us that are based on their culture. One of the things that sparked for me was just a little bit of a daydream about what is American culture anyway? What are the distinctives about American culture? And, just see if you think, I won't claim that I know everything about American culture any more than anybody else, but the Constitution is our, secular foundational document. And it says, individual voices matter. It says there are limits on what government can tell people to do. It says we can disagree with each other and still live together in a community. And potently, it says we can disagree with each other about what constitutes the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, at the same time that we affirm that whatever it is you believe constitutes life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you have the right to it just as much as I have to the one that I think. And this is maybe the most important one, our Constitution has embedded in it the assertion that we can change, that we are not perfect. Depending on whether you're Methodist or Presbyterian, you might say, we're definitely never going to be perfect or we're perfectible. But one way or the other, we could definitely come together on we're not perfect right now, for sure. But we can change. And even though we're not perfect, we can love each other and we can find ways to live together that are healthy for all of us. That's what American culture is.
Anything else from the conversation with Rabbi Nathan that you want to hit?
I just want to thank Rabbi Nathan and also all of the other faith leaders that you have had and will have on the show, and you for taking the time to unpack Texas Impact's legislative agenda in this really intentional way. It's been great. I've learned something from every one of the episodes so far, and I'm excited to continue to learn from our religious leaders.
As am I. But before we let you go, I do want to hit a couple of other topics today. First, you're going to Egypt for the global climate talks soon.
Yep.
The most important question I have for you is, are you going to vote before you leave? You're going to make sure
yes,
you do
sir.
that, right?
I am going to vote before I leave. I'm going to vote today, actually.
Today.
Yep.
Okay. I'll look forward to your I voted sticker on
Absolutely.
social media with the Texas Faith Votes hashtag.
Yep.
One of the questions, so I don't want to bring up specific events, but sometimes when you've been overseas at these events, American democracy has gone crazy. There's a lot going on here stateside over the course of the next few weeks. Hopefully you're not leaving us behind to suffer or anything like that. But talk to us about why it's important with everything going on here in the United States that you spend the time with our team heading to these climate negotiations.
You know, that's a great question, and thanks for asking. So, yeah, it does. In some ways, it feels weird that a lot of Americans will be out of the country in Egypt on Election Day talking about climate change, and a lot talking about how climate change is impacting people in other countries. It's really important, maybe more so than ever, that faith communities from the United States participate strongly in these global climate negotiations. One, because our State Department can't negotiate effectively for solutions that will benefit the whole world if they don't feel the strong backing of American voters. So it's really important that the faith communities in the United States understand and participate in this global space so that we can support our country, our team, I guess you could say, in working for the best we can, the best solutions, the best processes that we can in the global space. It's also really important. We're unbelievably privileged in this country. It's most Americans won't get the experience in their lives of being somewhere that is so much less privileged in so many ways that they can make a comparison. It's really important as people of faith that we hear the stories of people from other parts of the world and internalize them so that when we're talking about our domestic policies, whether they're about climate or about democracy building or about the rights of women or about migration, that we are holding in our hearts what our privileged perspective means compared to people in other parts of the world. And when we do that, it changes the way we participate, and it changes what we think is possible because we see what's necessary.
We'll look forward to getting a report when you get back. I'm sure we'll have you on the program and talk some about that. And we'll be following, obviously, Texas Impact and you on Twitter to hear updates from the COP. Also, before we close, it is Election Day coming soon, and Texas Impact has done quite a bit of work this time in terms of GOTV and making sure that people are participating in democracy. Any chance you could give us a sneak peek on how that's going so far and what kind of impact has the organization been having?
I'm happy to do so. I'm really proud. We've recruited way more than 100 poll workers. We've gotten, dozens and dozens of poll monitors. And in particular, our GOTV, Get Out the Vote, GOTV stands for, our efforts there are reaching hundreds of thousands of Texans. And I couldn't be prouder of our team and of the Texas faith communities, our board members and local congregations that are using the resources we've provided to drill down into their communities and really try to make sure as many people as possible have the information and resources they need to vote.
Yeah, and it's not too late to help with that, friends. If you're listening to this podcast when it's released, you still have a week and a half until Election Day. So make sure that you are using the Texas Impact Election Center. Make sure you're sharing it with your congregations. When you see Texas Impact posts come across your social media, go ahead and like and share those so that it can reach even more people. But that's been a fun project, and it's been really great to see so many Texans of faith participating. All right, B, anything else before we close out today?
No, I think I'm good if you're good, Scott.
I am good. It's been good seeing you, and safe travels to Egypt. We'll look forward to talking with you when you get back.
Thanks a lot.
I want to thank our guests today, Rabbi Mara Nathan and B. Moorhead. But I especially want to thank you for tuning in. And I hope you'll plan on listening to and sharing the series with your friends and networks. We're excited both about the guests we have joining us and the content we'll cover in the coming weeks. And remember, the goal of the series is to have Texans of Faith consider our priorities and give you the tools to have conversations with your representatives and candidates for office about these priorities. And the most important tool in the toolbox this week is Texas Impact's Election Center. So go check out those resources at texasimpact.org/voter-assistance. If you have questions or have suggestions for us, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at scott@texasimpact.org. And leave us a rating or review and leave a comment for us in the feed. We want to hear from you, and we want even more people to find us, so work that algorithm. So with that, I think it's time to draw this episode to a close. So make sure you're subscribed and sharing, and go ahead and check to make sure you're following Texas Impact social media. Then head on over to texasimpact.org and make sure you and your congregation are members of Texas Impact and supporting this important work. Friends, election 2022 is underway. Now is the time for Texans of Faith to engage our communities and networks. The world needs Texans of Faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnett, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.